Okay, I'm now speaking with Dean Robinson. Dean, I appreciate your coming out here. And, you had a chance to listen to a lot of different people speak today. Any comments on that before I ask you about yourself here?
Well, very enlightening speech today, from everybody. Now you realize I'm not really a group joiner. I'm sort of just out here on my own doing my thing. I will align with people in groups when I feel like it makes sense. And so with talking about the Justice or Else, Million Man March, well, I'm not the type to attend such an event except as an observer. Now I didn't attend.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. To be clear, not so much the march itself, the individual speaking about the march. Because I haven't seen that much fire in young women ever in life here in Fort Wayne.
Well, I love it because what she's going to find is that she's going to be surrounded by people who share common interests, have common goals. And so they can share these various experiences and maybe come to some sort of solutions or maybe just some game plans. And so I understand that is very empowering. Now, for me, as a black man in Fort Wayne, when I was a little kid, I'm going to have black kids telling me that I'm too white. I talk too white. It's always something like that. So ever since I was a kid, I've never been black enough for the black community. Okay? Now for white people, well, sometimes accepted, other times, well, you're just too black. And so by the time I get out of high school, I realized, look, this race stuff, there's nothing here for me. There's no reason to it. There is going to be some power in racial identity, but there's also separation in that too. And so in the United States, I think the percentage of black people who consider themselves African American or black in America, according to the Census Bureau and the CIA, it's like 12.9%. So let's just call that 13%. Consider themselves African American or black in the US. Now, when it comes to racial identity, well, race can be defined by so many different parameters. And when you look this up, like on dictionary.com, it'll let you know, well, you can divide race by various physical attributes, skin color, language, religion. That's why we talk about Jewish people, practicing all this Judaism. Well, somehow they're a race. So I've always found that odd. Well, they're a race based on religion, but you can't have a race based on religion. With white people, well, they don't consider themselves the white race. And when they do, as white supremacists, well, we find that off-putting. Black people and white people, all people find it off-putting. But white people, they don't define themselves as white. So in Fort Wayne, you're going to have German Fest. You have Greek Fest. Up in Bern, they have Swiss Days. They don't call any of this Black Days or Black Expo because that's what we get, is black, which I'm going to find is a poor way to describe a race. But that's all we have to deal with here in the U.S. That's what we've been grappling with. So we've got this blackness. When you look up the definition of black, it's always this occultism, depression. Everything that's bad is black. But somehow, when that term is applied to people, we're supposed to just ignore all this occultism and depression and depravity, everything that's black. We're just supposed to ignore that, but it's there. It's been cast on us that way. And so for us to seek this racial identity based on color, my goodness, we're always going to fumble by it. Always. Because white people aren't doing that, right? Talk about this white supremacy in the U.S., but they don't consider themselves white. They're going to tell you, well, I'm Scandinavian or I'm Swedish, I'm German. You will see that heritage celebrated in Fort Wayne at these various festivals. But for black people, well, we can't go back to our Nigerian culture or Liberian culture or any of these African nations. So this notion of national identity, the only thing that black people in America can have is the American identity. Now, I know it's a bitter pill to swallow, and people aren't swallowing it. Black people will not consider themselves American. They've gone ahead and taken on this notion of African American, so you're just sub-American. White people don't do that. They're just American.
But a moment ago, you mentioned something about something being cast upon us. What did you mean by that?
Well, this notion of we're just black. Okay, now when I was growing up, we're colored, Negro, but then it seems like, just for me, as I'm coming into my consciousness, it's probably like 75, 76 where I realized, okay, black is it, black. Now again, I know that had been used before, but I'm talking about my consciousness. As a person born in 66, mid-70s, I'm starting to get it.
But when you emerge in consciousness, that means that you're shedding off your indoctrination.
Well, we're indoctrinated into things all the time. That's why I was raised Catholic, I didn't choose that. That's just something, as I'm coming of age and I'm at a church, well, at some point I realize, well, I'm Catholic. Imagine that.
I mean, but indoctrination, I'm still overcoming my indoctrination, and some folks, they haven't come far enough yet, but I'm still working on it. But my point is that when you have so many things like that you're overcoming, and that one common denominator is, amongst people who have melanin, is that we do tend to come from Africa, and a lot of us, we were born here in America, but according to people, psychologists like Amos Wilson and others, your DNA still looks like Africa. So, are you saying that we shouldn't align ourselves with Africans, even though a lot of Africans who I know are whiter than white people in terms of ideology? It gets confusing there. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is, let's just back up. Now, anybody who says, look, I want to celebrate my national heritage in one of these, from one of these African nations, because Africa's a continent. So when I'm talking about national identity, well, African identity is not national, okay? That would be continental identity. I'm talking about national identity, okay? And so if black people want to celebrate some sort of racial identity, well, I think nationalism tends to help. It makes it easier. So white people, again, they can look back to Switzerland, they can look to Germany, they can look to these other nations, and then you'll see it in Fort Wayne, German Fest, Greek Fest, taking from that national identity, that national heritage, that is part of this melting pot in America, yet these Germans in Fort Wayne, this most German town, used to have the German-American Bank, but in the midst of World War I, when people not really digging these Germans, well, they had to change it to the Lincoln National Bank. But nonetheless, that German culture still celebrated today. White people celebrating this stuff, but celebrating national identity. Black people were at a disadvantage. It would be great if we could say, hey, I'm celebrating this Liberian culture, this Nigerian culture. It'd be great. And probably some people are able to find their heritage that way, but for black people in America, it's very difficult to do that because of our circumstances, all this kidnapping and slavery and eradication of our language of these various cultures. And so it's very difficult, maybe in some cases impossible, to reach back, because it would be awesome in Fort Wayne if we had Nigerian days or Liberia days. It would be awesome if we had that, but we don't. And so what we have to grasp onto is Black Expo, but black, I believe, color, I believe, is a poor way of describing cultural identity. And so it puts us at a disadvantage in terms of racial identity, which I believe nationalism really aids in that. Nationalism helps with this cultural identity of people.
As we keep working with that, I want to get back to the whole spirit here of people at least becoming intellectually enlightened and not being afraid to express what they feel as being the right answer, because Neely Fuller said that nobody has the right answer yet as to how to solve these problems, and what's important is for people to at least try to think on their own and present what they feel can help solve the problems here. And I noticed that one thing about you, I've noticed, and I've always been forgetting to bring it up. You pay a lot of attention to words and how they're used and the meanings of them. Is that where the problem lies?
Yes.
Because we don't know what we're saying?
Language is the basis of culture. You can talk about all this other stuff, color, you can talk about religion, but without language, you can't talk about it. So language is the basis of culture. It is how you can say, I accept that, or I don't accept that, I hate it, I can't stand it. Language is the basis of that. So when you have people talk about anti-Semitism, well, when we talk about Semitic or Semite, that has to do with language, these various Middle Eastern languages, including Hebrew. And so when people talk about, well, he's an anti-Semite, they're an anti-Semite, we've come to define that as anti-Judaism, anti-Jewish. But that's not really the basis of it. It is language. Language is the basis of culture. It is language that you use to express yourself, how you feel about everything. And so, in the United States, especially with this slang, the big slang now is thirsty. That's a slang that's getting thrown around. I saw on Empire the other night. It's 50 Cent talking about it too. I think it was Taraji P. Henson talking about 50 Cent. He's just thirsty. And now thirsty has entered the consciousness as slang. And thirsty indicates some sort of social desperation. But in reality, thirsty means you need some water in you. You need that stuff. When we talk about the word bad, in the 70s, when I'm growing up, well, that's when the word bad becomes a compliment. So what used to be bad for you was just bad. Now, that's a bad dude, but I'm complimenting him. That's a bad outfit, but I'm complimenting that outfit. So it is a fundamental undermining of language. And so it does breed confusion. Now, I've had people tell me, everyday people, and then these people who study English, study language, they're going to tell me, well, Dan, what you consider the destruction of language, we consider the evolution of language. So I'll tell you, the evolution of your language is the destruction of your language. When you have a word like gay, which for centuries just means joyous, happy. My middle name is Jay, based on Gaius, all this gay, happy stuff. I grew up on Gay Street, just down the road from here. That's when I was born. Yeah, the house I went to was 2318 Gay Street, okay? And so somehow this word means happy, joyous. All these centuries. Fred and Barney on the Flintstones, having this gay old time. Fred's not mounting Barney, no. When you talk about the gay 90s, the 1890s, not talking about homosexuality. Just talking about happiness. But now you use the word gay, you got to talk about all this homosexual stuff, and people get angry, they want to fight. When we talk about black, describing the skin, I've been over it. This is black, this is not. But somehow I'm a black person, and I've got to deal with all that occultism and depression, but people will tell me, well, Dean, that's not what it means when we're referring to you. But if I ask a person, well, a black person, are you talking about culture? Are you talking about skin color? Well, we're talking about skin color, Dean. Well, you failed, not black. Okay, Dean, we're talking about culture. All right, so if we're talking about culture, then a person can adopt a culture. So Rachel Dolezal, the black leader of the NAACP over the summer, one of these chapters, who identifies as black, but she's white, but she chooses his culture. She's chosen it. But I guess she can't be black because black means skin color, but it also means culture. And so when you have that, you have a fundamental breakdown of communication, and that's why people are fighting around here. We can't get forward because the very words we're using confusing all of us. To talk about the black community or the white community, it implies a cohesiveness that does not exist.
But I want to correct you here for a moment. With Rachel's case, a white woman pretending to be black. Now, there are a lot of black people here in Fort Wayne who've been known for years to be white. But I guess that's a different story.
Well, who is that?
I'm not going to mention any names.
Well, what does that mean to be white? Because again, people tell me, since I was a little kid that I act white and I talk white. I have a nephew in my family, that just recently, now this is one of these mixed race kids, he's black and white. He's going to tell me recently, Dean, you talk like you're white. What does that mean, Eric? What does it mean that I talk like a white person? What does that mean?
I don't know.
Don't tell me you don't know. You know exactly what it means. So answer the question. What does it mean that I talk like a white man?
Using good diction, being articulate, clarity, using words concisely.
Okay, so I have black people and white people, both in lockstep, letting me know that if I can use English, I'm being white. Now, good luck with that. That's why for me, I consider myself chocolatey, don't play this race stuff, but as you see, I'm here right now. And you and I, great example of how we can have all these various opinions, but we are going to find some common ground, and when we find that common ground, we're right here in harmony.
Speaking of common ground, I've noticed that in your Facebook conversations, you really have people come at you pretty strong. Can you draw on any generalities on the mindset of people who call themselves white when they misconstrue your commentaries?
It's not so much that they misunderstand what I'm saying, it's just they don't agree. And so there's recently this back and forth I'm in with Gina Burgess. She's, she runs for some of these political offices every once in a while. I think usually for one of these Allen County council seats. Now she's not running currently for anything, but she does a lot of social commentary on Facebook talking about these various municipal issues, all sorts of different stuff, talking about these political candidates. Now, a couple months ago, she got involved in this Northside High School Redskins issue. Because I guess Ben Giaquina brought it up. Somebody brought it up. And so she's going to say, well, the fact that he brought it up, he just brought it up to divide and distract us. Because Gina Burgess is then going to go on to reveal this consensus that she's found of white people and some natives in this area who don't believe the term Redskins is offensive. Gina Burgess is going to present this research that says, look, at the time when this student body was nicknamed the Redskins, well, the people that put that name on them, they meant no disrespect, nothing. It wasn't derogatory, it wasn't meant to be, and since I've got this opinion from some of these natives and white people who say today it's not offensive, then it's not offensive. And so that's the viewpoint that she's expressing, in my opinion. Now, you weighed in on that, as I weighed in, showing, well, Gina, you may have your critical mass of opinion, but Eric Hackley bringing these other opinions, I'm bringing these other opinions, why aren't you valuing those? When you look to the works of sports writer Dave Zirin, he talks about the National Football League's the Washington Redskins, and talks about, hey, when they named that team, it was steeped in racism. The owner of the team back then, openly racist. It was meant to be derogatory. But somehow, when I present that to Gina Burgess, it doesn't matter because she's already found that critical mass of opinion. She's got that democracy. She's got that mob rule that says Redskins is not offensive. And so it's not that when I bring my opinion with some facts and you do that, it's not that she's misconstruing us. It's not that she misunderstands us. It's that Gina Burgess doesn't agree with us. And so you can do that discourse so far, then it just has to break down into name calling. And that's usually what happens. And so when that happens, I'm not worried about it. It just means, well, they've obviously run out of ammunition. There's no rationality here, so they've got to go to the name calling. So when people disagree, I can't get mad at that. It's just going to reveal their worldview. And I realize in this world, we have so many different points of view. Now, I can still get along with Gina Burgess. I can still get along with a lot of people that I'm not in lockstep with. Minister Louis Farrakhan. Well, he's not my guy. I'm a Malcolm X guy. But Malcolm X is going to be the one that says, well, look, this notion of this black Muslim stuff, we're off. We're all connected, but well, he had to get his guts blown out after saying that. And so again, I'm a Malcolm X guy, but I'm not a group joiner. You know, I'm raised Catholic, but I'm not Catholic now. But I do love that Holy Bible. I love that stuff. A lot of wisdom in there. But I don't subscribe to religion because religion is just here to control people, just to give them another set of rules to follow.
But you know, as you wind down here, I do want to ask a question that nobody can seem to answer.
Lay it on me.
Or wants to.
Bring it!
In a couple of days from now, it's going to be the 225th anniversary of a battle that took place in the Northside High School Redskin territory. And that battle at the time was the worst defeat the Americans faced, the George Washington Americans, in U.S. history. Worst defeat ever until the following year when they fought outside of Toledo. Now my question is, the battle that took place here in Fort Wayne that ended up with the Battle of Fallen Timbers when Anthony Wayne came in and saved the day, and when they had the Treaty of Greenville the next year, Little Turtle signed away Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Anthony Wayne got all that land. But it all started right here. But we don't ever touch on the fact of how instrumental the battle was over by Northside High School. We don't even gloss over it. And I noticed that each time I try to bring it up, it falls flat. I was speaking before the city council a couple weeks ago and brought it up, and while I was speaking to them, it clicked in my mind that I must be crazy because I've been saying this for 20 years to the same people, and either I'm insane for saying the same thing, expecting them to respond differently, or something is off here. Why does that not connect that Fort Wayne, as we try to create our own identity, we never attach ourselves to the war history of this town?
Well, when you're talking about city council and any of these political types, well, they represent the established order. History is written by the victors, not the vanquished. And so...
But this is 200 years ago.
That's right. History is written by the victors. And so typically the victors, well, they want to make themselves look extra good. And that's what they do. And so in Fort Wayne, well, you had these native tribes that were here. They were victims of genocide. So, you know, George Washington could build this new nation. And that's the story they're going to tell. They're going to tell Washington's version of it. Sometimes they have to make up stories. You know, like this cherry tree that George Washington chopped down. And then he told his father, I can't tell a lie, I did it. That's a lie. It never happened. I think it's Parson Mason Weems writing this book about the fabulous life and times of George Washington. He even had to say, look, had to make up these stories, you know, to raise the profile of these leaders because we're trying to create these legends for this new nation. And so when you have, you know, these battles that would really enlighten, you know, the populace, well, it's the victors who are going to decide how much of that information is going to even survive. And since it's been maligned, well, you feel it, I feel it, we don't like it, but that is the answer. History is written by the victors, not by the vanquished. And then we also have to, let me make it quick, with this notion of nation building, the thing that people don't want to recognize and don't admit, nation building is a bloody, messy business. If you want to build a nation, I don't care where it is, you have to kill a lot of people, okay? It's the way nations are built. It's an ugly truth. It's a truth that we have to come to terms with. Because when you look at this scripture, this Holy Bible in Genesis, God, the Lord, creates this tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's one tree. One tree of knowledge of good and evil. So I don't know what makes people think that they're going to have a world with all this good and no evil. How would you know what's good without this evil? And so with this nation building, yeah, it's terrible stuff. But this United States of America we have now, my gosh, it's amazing. It truly is. You know it is. It's amazing. The fact that we can sit here and have this free discourse, talking about white supremacy, all this stuff, and we can openly talk about it. People think that, well, now because we're seeing all this police abuse of brothers, all this institutionalized racism, well, now we can see it on video, on our phones, everywhere. People think times are worse. People actually think times are worse. You know, now that we're able to expose all this institutionalized racism, break it down, have this harmony among people, have black culture actually accepted, but somehow, because people see all this stuff, they think things are worse than when my parents were growing up. People don't understand that it's, 1967, that the U.S. government says, look, this notion of interracial marriage bans, that's unconstitutional. 1967. I was born in 66. But somehow, you have people believing that times are worse now than they were when my parents were growing up in the 50s, when black people were just legally lynched. Racism open. Look at your media. Look at all these old TV shows and movies. Look at us now. But now people just think, my God, it's the worst time in the world to be alive. Early this summer, a couple of white guys, one of them a friend of mine, another one just an acquaintance, but we're both going to have, among these two guys, separate conversations about race relations in America. Both these white guys of the mind that race relations have never been worse. They've never seen it worse. But I had to tell both of these guys, that's not my experience. Race relations have never been better. When I remember the 70s, white people, adults, openly calling me nigger. Openly. And so when I tell that to the guy who's more my friend, he says, before I could even say that, he says, well, now if you say nigger or something, people just get bent out of shape. They look at you like you're a villain. I'm like, well, that's progress. That's not worse. That's better. But people, because they see all this stuff, they think things are worse. It's like, well, now a lot more people seeing it, a lot more people talking about these issues, so they think it's worse. But no, it's not.
But when you mention the bloody history, what have you, of nation building, I found out, I think there was either 2 or 3 epidemics on this land right here of smallpox and things like that, where they came in 2 or 3 separate times to kill the natives.
Yeah.
But now, when I bring this kind of stuff up, I find out that not only local natives, but even natives in the northern part of the state, it's something about my bringing this stuff to the forefront where they misunderstand that they think I'm trying to speak for them when I'm actually just talking about Indiana history, and I've not figured out how to speak about Indiana history without speaking of the natives here, because that's part of it, but I'm not picking on the natives, showing they're speaking for them, even though nobody's really saying, they're not speaking about their history that I've found. Because I found that over the years, I've written most of the stuff and done most of the videos on the natives, but yet I am being attacked by many of them, primarily because 4 or 5 years ago, we had a forum here in the same location, and an NAACP president. When I was, it was a forum that was at the time of elections, primaries.
Now was Bledsoe
I'm never gonna, no, it wasn't her, but I won't mention her name.
Okay.
But it was not a violence going on at the time, and I had some of the local natives here. I had retarded people here, mentally challenged organizations. I had homeless here. I had all kind of groups here, but I had wanted to show the roots of the violence here, and I made the remark that one of the most violent gangs in Fort Wayne history, their colors were red, white, and blue. And when this person spotted back that we don't care about some Chief Little whatever, and she said that in front of the natives, and it was offensive. And but anyway, since that point in time, I was mad at the NAACP for doing that. But what I'm driving at is today a lot of people from the NAACP don't like me, and the natives ain't speaking to me, and I'm caught in the middle. And all I did was hold a camera in my hands and asking the questions. I'm asking from you a little bit of enlightenment on that, because I can't get any sense out of the natives because they're not talking to me. And in fact, one native said that we're here in the wrong place at the wrong time. I said, what in the hell does that mean? I couldn't, but at the same time, I'm upset with the natives for thinking that I would stab them in the back after years of working with them, and to take one incident and hold me totally accountable for what some other independent-minded person did. I don't understand it.
Well, it's tricky when you start talking about all this racial identity. It is tricky. So maybe some of these natives that you're talking about, and again, it's not going to be all of them, because I'm sure there's some natives you're very friendly with, but some people who might look at what you're doing, they might say, well, why is Eric Hackley, why is this black guy acting like he's an advocate for us? But you might say, well, I'm not acting like an advocate, I'm just trying to spread this history. But you're going to be very passionate about it because you realize the importance of it, so you're very passionate. And so a lot of people are probably going to think, well, Eric's taking a lot of this stuff personally. And so once they kind of recognize that Eric's very passionate, may seem he's taking it personally, it's like, well, is he trying to adopt the personhood of us natives? But you have some of this native blood flowing through you, as do I.
Other Hackleys have native blood. Mm-hmm. Mine is strictly, African and English, but some of those English Hackleys married the natives here locally. Mm-hmm. So it's not my blood, but yet me and the natives would probably share the same DNA if I can persuade some of them to get tested.
Mm-hmm. But isn't that something? So we're talking about, just you personally. You have this, this African, this English and native blood in you, but we're
not in me, in someone else.
Well, in your family,
but they're still Hackleys.
In the Hackley bloodline.
Yes.
Okay, so Eric Hackley really addressing this African stuff. Eric Hackley really addressing this native stuff. Well, what about English Hackley? I mean, much about English Hackley, but again, you can probably tell me, well, Dean, here's where I've talked about this stuff. But when people recognize you, and they're going to say, well, if I have to kind of label or categorize Eric, well, he's going to be this activist, this historian, who's really concerned about these issues of black people and natives. That's what people are going to think. And so maybe some of these natives might say, well, Eric appears to be trying to represent us, whereas I would say Eric's just trying to teach everybody. But if somebody sees it that way, well, sometimes people are going to see it that way. If I'm doing something that's maybe comical, something that's more stand-up, well, I can say something that's racist or sexist, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm a racist or a sexist. So sometimes people will witness what you're doing and saying. They'll have their own opinion on it. Can't necessarily say they're wrong. Sometimes you have to say, well, what did I do to inspire that response? And so with you, well, what you're doing is going to inspire certain responses. You're going to have some people saying, yeah, Eric, this is awesome. I mean, we're dealing with me, somebody's going to say, Eric, that's awesome. Eric, here you're off. And then that's when we're going to argue a little bit. But I find that discourse, whether we're agreeing or disagreeing, all of it can be beneficial. So if we don't see eye to eye, if I don't see eye to eye with Gina Burgess, well, some people are going to witness that discourse, and then they can choose for themselves. They can say, well, here's a guy just bringing this knowledge. Here's a person really angry at him, and then that person starts calling Dean names. I don't need to do anything beyond that. I don't need to be angry at anybody. I don't have to keep going at it with any person who disagrees with me to get them on my side. Because I realize I don't need that. And so to bring this back around, talking about, justice or else. When I'm listening to Glenn Beck talk about it, he's scared. He was scared of this Million Man March. And he's going to say, yeah, there were 1 million people out there. Because I think at one of the previous marches, these right-wingers, they're like, no, it's not 1 million people out there. No way. Never. But this time they're like, yeah, at least 1 million out there. But Glenn Beck's scared. So he's saying, well, justice or else? Well, what do you mean by or else? What do you mean? I'm so scared. Now, I'm thinking, well, justice or else, that could be anything. How about justice or the status quo? Justice or injustice? But Glenn Beck, he's just saying, well, Black Lives Matter. They're just killing people out here, but all lives matter. It's like, well, dude, you're going to be mad at Glenn Beck. You're going to be mad at justice or else. You're going to be mad at the Million Man March. You're going to be mad at it. You're going to be scared of it, but you're not scared of invoking Martin Luther King Jr. when you're doing your thing. Glenn Beck. But again, I'm not worried about trying to be in consensus with Glenn, not concerned about being in lockstep with Louis Farrakhan. And anybody who says, well, I do agree with him, maybe I'm in lockstep with him, I don't have to argue with that person, because as we talk, we're probably going to find a lot of common ground. You know, if we talk about white supremacy, I'm going to realize, well, yeah, I'm a victim of that, John. It's not stopping me from doing anything. I can talk about it. I can also talk about black supremacy in some of these African nations, where if you're a warlord, you're killing people, well, you might get a seat at the peace conference table.
But what I found is a lot of those African warlords are being funded by the white supremacists.
Again, it's all mixed up. So it's like, well, you can pick your villain if you want. Your villain can be black, your villain can be white, whatever. I mean, President Barack Obama, what a great example. He's got a white mother and a black father. But if you say that he's white, people are like, well, what are you talking about? You're absolutely crazy. That man is as black as the night. But he's pretty light-skinned. But he's so black. But we can't talk about his white mama. People just forget about it. But somehow, you know, the first black president, who's just another white president, according to some of these white people, these white Republicans, they're wondering, well, why didn't he solve racism? You even had Rupert Murdoch, you know, News Corp, Fox News, recently tweeting about Ben Carson and his wife Cindy, saying these people are great. What about a real black president who can tackle racism and some other stuff? Rupert Murdoch, an 84-year-old billionaire from Australia, you know, running Fox News and Fox TV, you know, with Empire. And then you go across the hall to Fox News, well, you might have Bill O'Reilly insulting Empire. But nonetheless, you got a white guy talking about Ben Carson and talking about, wouldn't it be great if we had a real black president to tackle racism? Well, why is it our job? You know, we got all this junk put down on us since the beginning of this country, you know, before it was even founded as the United States. We got to put down with all that junk. But then, a guy who's considered half black is supposed to just solve all this stuff.
But before you leave Rupert Murdoch in Australia, I think Australia didn't declare the Aborigines human until 1967.
You got to love it.
So.
You got to love it. And so with black people in America, we're always supposed to look forward. We're always supposed to look forward. You even get an actor like Morgan Freeman. He said, well, the only way we're going to just stop racism is if we just stop talking about it. That's the only way we're going to solve it. Now, other people would say, well, how can you know where you are now if you don't know your history? And so we got to look back to see where we are now. And so there's two trains of thought there. And it's a double standard for black people. But I understand double standards exist. I don't trip when I encounter them. And so black people are encouraged to look forward. Don't look at your history. White people are supposed to consider the answer to 1984 is 1776. So we're supposed to look to fiction that describes the year 1984, which is in the past. But the cure to that, you know, this government, you know, overreach, the cure to 1984 is 1776. You know, when we weren't people. And when these monks come up with their constitution, that these white Republicans, they love saying this constitution is so awesome. Well, Constitution talking about 3/5 of a person.
We have to pick another time to talk, you know, the Constitution, the U.S. and the Indiana Constitution. It's about 2 degrees in this room here. I'm freezing to death here. So I want to go ahead and sign off. But first, I want to appreciate your coming on here. And I want to tell the Facebook folks, this is one man you don't want to argue with. I don't want to argue with him. You're the only person who I don't like to argue with because it's just a futile exercise. I don't like doing that, but I will argue with anybody else. So again, thank you all for watching. Good night, and God bless you.